Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka.
Happy little
You stupid men! Avengers assemble!
Hey everybody, Patman QC here, and do not attempt to adjust your peepers because yes, I have covered this game before. The original video was an early one of mine that was released almost 6 years ago with primitive equipment, and looking back on it, it's not very good. It also clocked in at a whopping 9 minutes, and that included the conversions. I felt this game deserved more recognition, so this one clocks in at over 25 minutes. Clearly there is lots of new info and everything just looks and sounds a whole lot better. I rebuilt this video from scratch so everything is brand new. Hopefully you all enjoy it. Anyone who knows me will know that I love superheroes. It's clearly obvious just from my username alone. Growing up as a wee little peckerwood in the mean streets of Illinois, I can recall getting my brother's old comics as well as being in awe of their Aurora model kits. I was also infatuated with the bright, colorful costumes of the 1966 Adam West Batman TV show, which is really where my love of the heroes came from. Every year for Halloween, I would dress up as my favorite superhero or, just for giggles, step into a phone booth and rip open my shirt to reveal my Superman shirt below. Long before these heroic characters were a mainstay in cinemas all across the world, we were able to enjoy brief, fleeting moments such as the Christopher Reeve Superman movies and, to a lesser extent, the Captain America TV movies. If you were a video game and comic book fan in the early 1980s, more than likely you got your feet wet with the Spider-Man game from Parker Brothers for the Atari 2600. This was an excellent game back in the day and would be a sign of great things to come for our titular heroes in pixelated form. Today, we are going to take a look at a group of super-powered individuals whose main goal in life was to bring an end to corruption and evildoers everywhere. No, I'm not talking about the Just a Lot of Animals. I'm talking about Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, and in particular, the 1991 Data East arcade classic, Captain America and the Avengers. Why were a lot of the prominent characters from the Avengers comics not featured in this game? Why did the Super Nintendo version turn out so poorly? Let's find out as we delve into the history of Captain America and the Avengers. As previously stated, the first Marvel video game would be Spider-Man for the Atari 2600, which was extremely cool to play, especially back in the early 1980s. Due to the success of this title, the Incredible Hulk video game was planned but never saw the light of day. After that, Marvel's track record in the 1980s becomes a bit spotty, but there were some highlights including the graphic text adventure series for 8-bit computers everywhere entitled Quest Probe, which saw prominent Marvel characters take center stage such as the Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man, and 50% of the Fantastic Four. Let's not forget about the Howard the Duck computer game as well. Speaking of computer games, I might as well mention the very first Captain America game, which was Captain America Defies the Doom Tube. This was released for a variety of personal computers across the pond, and it's a bit bizarre to say the least. However, when it comes to arcade games set in the Marvel Universe, the distinction of the very first one would have to go to Sega's Spider-Man. This was released approximately 1 month before Captain America and the Avengers, and it was a fantastic game to say the least. It offered 4 players simultaneously, but it never saw the light of day on any home platforms at the time. A Sega 32X version was rumored but never came to be. In the late 1980s, comic books were still very popular here in the States, and thanks to the huge success of the 1989 Batman movie, the company of Data East were keen on cashing in. Data East had been around for a number of years by this point, bringing us arcade classics such as RoboCop, Karate Champ, and Bad Dudes, among many others. When it came to the creation of this game, designer Hidenobu Ito had one mandate from the higher-ups at Data East, which was to create at least a 2-player co-op game in order to increase revenue. He had always enjoyed the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man live-action shows from the 1970s, so he immediately reached out to Marvel in order to secure a license. Unfortunately, Spider-Man was tied up by Sega thanks to their upcoming arcade game, which was to be released in late 1991. At this point, sticking with Marvel, he decided to go for the whole ball of wax and license Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, instead. Thanks to the increased roster of the Avengers, he decided to change the format from 2 players simultaneously to 4 instead. While the 4-player aspect wouldn't be difficult to pull off, he did run into another problem. When it came to the roster of the Avengers, some of the big guns were off the table thanks to separate licensing agreements. Captain America and Iron Man were available, but the Incredible Hulk and the Mighty Thor could not be used, so other stand-ins would have to do, including Hawkeye and Vision. This was long before these characters exploded into the mainstream, so perhaps Mr. Ito had a crystal ball, and by doing that voodoo that he do, he was able to predict the popularity of each character. Mr. Ito was inspired by the success of the 4-player Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game and also The Simpsons, which were both created by Konami. He wanted to recreate that magic, only this time utilizing Marvel superheroes and villains. He wanted to bring the comic book to life, so he included a number of panels that looked to be ripped straight off the pages of the Avengers books. The artwork was done by Masanori Toroku, which included graphics that are bright and colorful. It's also likely that Mr. Ito was inspired by Capcom's Final Fight arcade game, and although the sprites are a bit on the small side, everything pops off the screen. The backgrounds themselves are also extremely detailed in certain areas. Along with the excellent graphics, the audio was given special attention by Tatsuya Kiuchi and Tomoyoshi Sato. A ton of dialogue as well as grunts and groans were used for each of the heroes and villains, including a number of iconic lines which I still use to this day, including
You stupid men!
and
I can't lose!
the sampled speech is also extremely clear. In addition to the 4-player cabinet, a smaller 2-player version was also available, although I never got to see one in person back in the day. Captain America and the Avengers was released by Data East into arcades in 1991. As the story goes, the dastardly, evil, nefarious Red Skull has assembled a team of supervillains in an attempt to take over the world. He has used his ill-gotten wealth to assemble his dudes with attitudes using a mind control machine to bring them fully under his power. It's up to you and the rest of the Avengers to bring these evil doers to justice and stop the Red Skull once and for all. This is a 1 to 4 player simultaneous beat 'em up that takes place across 5 levels or scenes as they are referred to in the game, with various mid-level and end-level bosses. Data East did a great job of mining the Avengers mythology and included a number of classic villains. These side-scrolling levels also include a couple of flying sequences as well. In these levels, Iron Man and Vision will fly on their own, whereas Captain America and Hawkeye have to use Tony Stark's flying machines. In the background, you'll notice some slick, multiplane parallax scrolling in the flying levels as well. You assemble the Avengers, which includes Captain America, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and Vision. Similar to other brawlers back in the day, the controls are simple, with you utilizing an attack button and a jump button. You essentially walk around punching the crap out of each individual. After hitting an enemy with the first punch, you can pick them up and throw them into a pack of other baddies, knocking them down in the process. By pressing these 2 buttons together, you will unleash a unique arranged special attack such as Captain America throwing shields, Hawkeye shooting arrows, or Iron Man and Vision blasting the enemies with an energy beam. You can also jump and do a flying attack as well. In addition to your standard punching and jumping attacks, you can also do dashing moves at your opponent. The typical comic panels, biffs, and pows are also shown whenever you land a successful attack. The enemies are fast and furious and stick to you like flies to a donkey, but we also get some big bads from the comics as well, including the Grim Reaper, Crossbones, Juggernaut, Ultron, and the big bad of the game, the Red Skull. At the start of each level, the Avengers yell out their trademark, Avengers Assemble, which, as a comics fan, I always thought was really cool.
Avengers Assemble!
Speaking of the Avengers, although there are only 4 playable characters, other characters will pop up to help, including the Submariner, Wonder Man, the Wasp, and Quicksilver. There are also various objects you can pick up and throw at enemies, such as rocks, barrels, and even soda cans. Your health is represented as an HP number at the top next to an icon of your character. This starts out at 100 and slowly depletes with the more damage you take. Every time your character takes any damage, the hero portrait at the top next to your HP will grimace in pain. The closer to death you become, the worse your character looks. Buried deep in the arcade code were a number of unused character portraits with different expressions that went unused. If you've taken all you can take and you can't take it anymore, your character will succumb to his injuries and die. In the process, you'll let out a death yell of
I can't move!
until you either decide to walk away or insert more credits. In between each level, there are a number of comic panels and text which furthers the story and feels like a comic book come to life. The levels include Scene 1, The Avengers. Scene 2, Target Town. Scene 3, Challenge at the Bottom of the Sea. Scene 4, Giant Laser Cannon. And Scene 5, the end of the Red Skull. The various mid-level and end-level bosses you encounter include the Living Laser, Whirlwind, a Sentinel, although he is referred to as a giant robot in the game, the Grim Reaper, the Wizard, Mech Taco, the Real Mandarin, Juggernaut, Ultron, Crossbones, the Red Skull, and the final boss of the game, the Red Skull's Mechanized Skull. After defeating the Mechanized Skull, a long ending is shown via comic panels and a number of texts, although it doesn't look like it's the end of the Red Skull. The final ending shot even appears to show Fred from Scooby-Doo celebrating with the Avengers. After this, the game is over. The arcade game was a big hit for Data East and even topped the Replay Arcade earnings chart in November of 1991. The game did receive a number of conversions, but sadly none for the home computer market. Before getting into the conversions, I wanted to mention that the game did appear on the original NES with the same title, but it's a completely different game. In this game, Iron Man and Vision have been kidnapped by the dastardly Red Skull, so it's up to Hawkeye and Captain America to rescue them. While the characters do have a good arsenal of moves, it's a bit mundane overall. The visuals are decent with some bright colors, but the animation is a bit choppy. Your characters also start out a bit underpowered, and you have to collect shards of power crystals scattered throughout each level. I would assume Data East meant to call these Infinity Gems, but who knows. While this sounds fun in theory, you have to collect 200 of these shards before any improvement is seen. You also have to track down a key crystal to unlock the next level's exit, which means lots and lots of backtracking. Some of the other Avengers, such as the Wasp, do make an appearance, but only during the intermissions. The soundtrack is pretty good, but the boring gameplay lets it all down. The final Avengers game by Data East is Avengers in Galactic Storm, which was a fighting game released into arcades in 1995. This uses pre-rendered 2D sprites, which was the style at the time, on ordinary flat backgrounds. Certain games at the time used pre-rendered graphics, but the animation would oftentimes turn out horrendous, similar to Rise of the Robots. That's not the case here though. There are two modes available, a story mode which is based on the Galactic Storm comic storyline, and a one-on-one fighter. The roster is a bit limited with only 8 playable characters, with the most recognizable being Captain America. There are helper characters that you can pick, such as Iron Man and the Mighty Thor. I would much rather play as these helper characters than 95% of the rest of the roster. The audio was pretty good, and it does use a fair amount of digitized speech. The controls are responsive enough, but this game just didn't make a splash in the arcades back in 1995. These conversions were a bit of a mixed bag, but I will start with my personal favorite, which was the Sega Genesis version. This was co-developed by Data East and Opera House, and they did a really good job. While the 4-player co-op mode from the arcade game is missing, everything else as far as gameplay goes has been left intact. Only the text explaining the story remains on an empty background in between levels. The graphics are good along with the animation, although the backgrounds are not as detailed as they were in the arcade version. The screen is also letterboxed across all formats. The number of enemies on screen are faithfully replicated, as are the various bosses. There is no slowdown and very little flicker. Something else that has been retained for the most part is all of the digitized speech. It's not quite as loud and boisterous as found in the arcade version, but it's there, and that's a huge plus. All of the levels from the arcade game have been included, and we even have most of the ending sequence. The playability is good for the most part, although there is some collision detection issues on occasion. For some reason, there are also more objects littered throughout the levels for you to use, which does help in your overall quest for justice. Speaking of needing a little help, there is also a difficulty adjuster in the options. A hack was released a number of years back that brought the game's colors more in line with the actual arcade game.
You can't go through.
The Super Nintendo version did not fare quite as well. This was licensed to Mindscape and developed by Real Time Associates. All 4 Avengers are intact, as are the comic panels in between each level. Speaking of the levels, they all made it over, although the backgrounds are far less detailed than found in the Sega Genesis version. The colors themselves are better, but you can tell that Data East had no involvement with this port because the gameplay is terrible. If you thought the collision detection was bad in the Genesis version, then that is nothing compared to what you'll find here. Something else that is missing are the various frames of animation and 95% of the digitized speech. Even the seminal cry, "Avengers Assemble," was replaced at the start of each level with "OK, go!" Speaking of the dialogue, for some reason they completely rewrote the script in an apparent attempt at making it more serious. Also, the character portraits do not react in pain whenever they are hit. The music is also very low-key and sounds much better on the Genesis. Most, if not all, of the throwable objects are missing as well. As far as which version is better, I prefer the Sega Genesis port just because the playability has been more refined and, of course, all of the speech, which brings everything alive. The Super Nintendo has slightly better colors, but the playability is not so great. The Game Gear port is a stripped down version of the Super Nintendo, and you actually only get to fight one enemy at a time. Once again, this was brought to us by real-time associates who also developed the Game Boy version, and it shows. This is set more like a platform title in which your character is unable to move around the screen. You just move left and right unless you are jumping on the platforms. The graphics are colorful, but the limited animation from the Super NES title rears its ugly head here as well. The game is split across 5 levels with sub-levels in each one. A lot of the bosses did not make it over as well, including the final fight with the mechanized skull. The cutscenes in between each level are missing completely. This port is the epitome of tediousness, and it is definitely not fun to play. The Game Boy version is almost identical to the Game Gear, only stripped of all of its colors. The audio is also not very good. The playability is pretty much identical to the Game Gear, although the difficulty is a little bit easier. There you have it, everybody, the new and revised history of Captain America and the Avengers. Out of all the superhero titles released in the arcades, this is one of my favorites. It's not quite as polished as the Turtles, but it's still fun to play. If you've never had the chance to control Earth's mightiest heroes, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.